Cool. I guess intro was already done, but just a couple of words on myself. So as mentioned, I've been living in Asia for the past maybe 7 to 8 years, always working in product, tech world, in a number of startups, as well as corporate realities. Hopefully, I'll give you a little bit of insights within these words. Right now, I lead product at Delivery Hero, which is obviously the mama company of foodpanda, meaning that whenever we launch features and projects, they are pretty much scattered across several countries and impacting a number of brands. If you're from Europe, you might have heard of Foodora or maybe Glovo, right? Some of you probably might have used those. I'm living in Thailand right now, been living in a number of countries before. And yeah, you can see a little bit more details about what I like doing maybe later, but we can connect for sure in the next few minutes. Now, I think Drake usually it's always right, unless it comes to betting big bets. Normally, it's not so, let's say, so much to follow. But in this case, I think he's really saying something pretty critical, and it's something that I've noticed in both, smaller as well as bigger realities. It's really common. It's not necessarily wrong, and I will explain maybe throughout the little journey I'm going to bring you through. Why, but there is certainly something that can be improved. And by the way, a little disclaimer here. As you know, I'm Italian, right? And Italian likes to complain a lot. So this will be a little bit of a rant, right? But take it with a pinch of salt. There's also some interesting positive insights at the end of the presentation. And maybe disclaimer number 2. I don't know if you noticed, but I felt this, especially in the past couple of years. There has been really a growing hype around my profession, our profession. I see a lot of familiar faces in the crowd. And of course, as a product person, I couldn't be more proud of it. But there is also a lot of, how can I say, misleading information being, spread across social media, and especially the so-called expert in the field. Certainly, our profession is beautiful. There is so much to do. It's so interesting, so much ownership, so many possibilities, right? But at the same time, I feel like there is a little bit of a dark side to it that more often than not is not really covered. You know what I mean, right? If you've been working in product management or with product managers, there's usually that feeling of stress, of lack of maybe full ownership. It's like the whole maybe project or even company is like really hanging over your shoulders. And we'll speak about it in a bit. This will not be the typical masterclass. I'll be bringing up a few examples from my own personal experience, which I think is a little bit more original in a way. So without any further ado, let's start with maybe this project, which I'm particularly proud of, actually. I'm saying voucher visibility with an invisible team. What is this about? Basically, this voucher visibility project was a very large initiative in, let's say, Company A, we'll call it Company A, where we were all trying to really leverage the power of our own incentives and mechanics to expose new features of our platform. So basically drawing users into trying new elements, experiencing new flows, really typical acquisition incentives, in this case, vouchers. Now, let's start with the premise that data were amazing. So there was an incredible backup support from both a data and a stakeholder standpoint. The project was pretty much sold to upper leadership. All the due research and discovery was completed. Just that second sentence, with an invisible team. It's actually right. So I didn't have a team at the end of the day to develop what we wanted to. And it's incredible. It's incredible. It's something that I guess textbooks or any of these masterclasses don't really teach you. So we normally preach about scarcity of resources, extreme prioritization. You need to really pick what really matters as opposed to what might not and can be postponed in the future. But what if you really happen to have no team whatsoever? And it happened more than once. So this is just one example, but it can really happen. Now, the reasons behind it, there's many, right? We can put the blame on so many elements. Let's just say that in this case, the former leadership team, so my boss and my boss's bosses and so forth, were pretty new to the organization and really, in a way, failed to plan ahead for the right engineering team, maybe designers, analytics, and so forth to be deployed onto this project and onto my squad back then. Eventually, we managed to pull it off. You got to be crafty as a PM. There is a lot of improvising work that you need to do. You got to use your logic, your gut feeling. In this case, we were borrowing resources from whichever team had some, so literally begging with our hands. We managed to pull that off, but actually another problem arose in the middle, which is quite relevant to what we're talking about right now, which is besides this feeling of pressure that me as a PM and of course the team were feeling, we also had at some point our stakeholders, which were usually normally extremely supportive of our initiatives, and especially this one, all of a sudden starting to back off from their, in a way, interest of this. Basically, the argument was, since you're going to be so late, because of whatever reason, we don't care, you're going to deploy this so late, we don't think we can commit to it as much. We think that the situation will change, the economical landscape, whatever we are operating in might be different back then. So why would we support you? So additional struggle, we had to basically rebuild a whole business case internally and paradoxically sell this project back again to some of our business stakeholders and eventually prove that it was actually worth it, because it was. And eventually it really was. But again, incredible story. I hope nobody would go through this, but it can happen, and definitely not in the textbooks. Now, let's move on to another one. This one was interesting. Item replacement, swapping laptops with mojitos. What? Quite weird. Speaking of item replacement, I think we all know what that means, right? Imagine a company, a platform providing products, could be Lazada, right? You order something, for whatever reason, a missing, a problem with an inventory, the supplier is running out of stock. That one product or several products, several items are not available anymore. So what do? Obviously, you can kill two birds with one stone by offering a set of replacements that the customer can pick from. And in this way, you are both providing alternatives to the customer, so the journey is a little bit smoother. Ultimately, you are hopefully offering something that is interesting to the customer. And at the same time, as a company, you are saving on potential GMV losses. So imagine selling dozens, hundreds, thousands of goods, and then those being out of stock or being unavailable for whatever reason, and across many shops you might be working with, that's a lot of money potentially being lost. Now, again, similar to the first project we discussed, here there was a very strong backup by the business. We had, in this case, lots of positive insights. We had basically the whole company backing us up on this. Every single country, every single brand we were working with was really looking forward to have this operational as soon as possible. And I have to tell you that discovery, execution, everything was going so smoothly. We were actually a little bit ahead of time, which normally, as you know, in tech and product is not super common. What happens next is that we have this one team that is in charge of really the final beats of the deployment phase, in the execution phase, which is what we call product operations or product support. So people who are really onboarding the final, for example, customers, in this case, vendors, to make sure that the final tests are running and ultimately give us green light for a mass deployment. That's how the company was structured. Now, these people, when we really had scheduled to run this test, eventually went missing. And by missing, I literally mean that we were using Slack back then. None of their team, so not the guy in charge of it, not his potential backup, not their managers, was available. Eventually, like a few weeks later, we found out that they went on holidays, right? So just straightforwardly, ignore their duties and left the company for a few weeks. Now, you can imagine what kind of pressure we experienced at that time. We really had to think how to make these things happen. I'm not going to get into the details of how to mitigate this. Ultimately, obviously, as a product person and obviously as a team in charge of this, you might want to solve it anyways, because as you are leading the project, you are eventually responsible for it. So what we ended up doing was quite common, element, like working overtime, working over the weekends, really spending those extra hours to make sure that we could still onboard those vendors in time for final testing and deployment. Now, the moral of the story is the project went eventually smoothly. It's still running. Maybe later we'll speak about which company this is about, but I think you can probably find it if you look at my resume. It's quite clear. But the moral is really that eventually these people who left obviously got some level of reproaching, right? So there was some note in their performance review saying that they didn't quite do the right thing, but it honestly ended there, right? So no real ownership, but also not so much repercussions. And imagine if we couldn't have solved this for whatever reason, what would be the consequences, right? I will leave you with this thought. We can move on to the next example. We are almost there. The next one is about a product listing MVP and blacklisting. This is also quite interesting. It's about one of my first experiences in the startup world, where obviously the pace of work and also the flexibility and the freedom of executing is extremely interesting, right? Comparing that with a corporate, it's very different. Personally, I love it. In this case, we were testing really something quite innovative. It was a new way of handling in parallel the product listing for a number of platforms here in Southeast Asia. So you can imagine Lazada, Shopee, JD, and all of those, with basically a better flow for the operators running internally within the company, new ways of managing campaigns, and then posting around prices. Basically, a major upgrade in the way the company would operate from that moment onward. As you know, here in Asia, we love campaigns, right? There is 10-10, 12-12, Payday, and all of those, right? We all flood those platforms looking for the best deals. And really, that's critical here, because when we were told to basically deploy this feature, there was obviously no intention on our side to make it spread and let's say available for the whole company, for the whole shops, for all the products we were dealing with. It was basically an MVP. So we kindly asked the business back then to just test it on a number of products and then give us feedback for the campaigns to come. Obviously, we won't get too much into the details here. Again, we don't have time. But let's say leadership team back then thought they, in a way, knew it better. And by leadership, I really mean the C-levels behind the company, and took what we had and really did whatever they wanted with it, which, as you can imagine, means applying this new cool stuff to all products, all services, everything at once, without having any vouching from myself or the tech team. And what do you think happened at that point? Obviously, mayhem. That night, it was one of the worst nights I've ever had in my life. We had so many problems in so many aspects all at once. Obviously, the system was not handling very well the extra loads. It was not being tested for that. Nothing of that ever happened. But besides the major failure, right, which is somewhat common, you can run iterations. You can fix that in the future in a regular environment. Here, what's really important is that in the days following this let's say all-nighter, the C-levels, instead of maybe feeling themselves accountable for what happened to some extent, they really decided to go to the next level. They pulled us apart in a separate room, a little bit far from where people used to work in, and they literally engaged in one of the most awful, like public shaming, like finger pointing behavior I've ever experienced. And you can imagine how, maybe not so much myself, eventually I could keep pretty cool, I guess, but even the junior team members, people who are not so experienced, like what kind of message you're passing, right? And let's summarize it into a very toxic environment from that moment onwards. which obviously, by the way, it's something that product people also need to deal with. It's something that can happen, maybe a trait, maybe more frequently in a company. And usually you have to be a little bit of a therapist at some point. Because no matter what, responsibilities are on you to carry on with whatever goals, whatever targets you set for yourself and the team. And that needs to be followed through no matter what. So this plus the unfortunate finding that just as this happened for this specific feature, we realized that this MVP that was really meant to be an MVP for us to test and see what would happen next really paved the way for a new ways of working where MVPs, in a way, in this company were meant to stay, right? And this is so much against everything we are thought of as PMs or tech people. Normally, you launch a minimum viable iteration that solves basic needs for what you are supposed to solve, achieve, or try to. And then you iterate. You try to adjust, solve additional edge cases, solve more use cases, and so forth. This example taught me, and it actually happened in many other companies, that MVPs sometimes are there to stay. So my advice here is that usually try to make sure that your MVP is good enough, because it's probably going to stay, right? Then one more funny example. This is from really my early stage. It was back in Japan. We were developing, again, a new CRM system for some of our biggest clients, like AAA, AAA vendors, like really big guys across Japan and APAC in general. And we were basically very much on track on, I think, with the discovery work, with the amazing team we had, to really sell a beautiful project to these guys. This new CRM service was amazing back in the days. It was enabling so many more possibilities in terms of cross-selling for these vendors, in terms of dashboard monitoring, data analysis, and so forth. Really, really cool stuff. These vendors were already supposed to like it. We knew it. We already somewhat teased them in the past few days. So this specific presentation that we were going to have, and this is basically where the funny thing is about to happen, was meant to be really just formalities for them to sign off the project and eventually give us green light to proceed. Now, what could possibly happen in such a situation? It seems like everything is fine. We are just going in strong of our project, knowing that everybody likes it already. Well, this presentation, like all the past ones, are obviously in English, right? And that's what you would expect people could master, at least in the business world. With the exception that in this meeting room, the only people speaking English were us. We were faced with really a board of, in a way, all Japanese business owners or managing directors or country managers who couldn't speak or read a single word in English. So our presentation was completely useless. Now, this is something that obviously nobody was foreseeing. We honestly asked ourselves, how could this be possible? Because we knew our audience was supposed to be the usual, kind of middleman we used to talk to, who obviously could master English with no issues. But nonetheless, apparently, our leadership team or some of the account managers managed to organize and improvise a meeting of this sort. So all the good comm skills, transparency and clarity and things that normally product and teams in general need to empower were pretty much useless when you can't communicate in the right language. So yeah, we got pretty crafty. So we tried with hand gestures, a little bit of Google Translate, some of our broken Japanese. Eventually we made it. A little bit of delay, but not too much of a big deal. But this could happen, right? It was quite interesting. So just to wrap it, I think in general, besides this last funny example, there is something that is pretty common across everything I've mentioned so far. And I don't know if you noticed, but it's something that it's either explicitly said in a way, so people, product people are really, sometimes facing this in a very straightforward manner from their managers, from their peers, from their stakeholders. And some other times it's implied. It's something that it's unspoken, but really something you can breathe, you can feel in the air. And I think we are talking about a lack of accountability from many of the remaining parties that are responsible for a project delivery, project development. Obviously, we mentioned that PMs are, clearly leading. They are in charge of eventually making sure that things work out for the best. But I also don't believe this is the only way, or maybe the best way to handle things, both from a product, let's say, manager perspective, as well as from a company which is empowering product people. And so at the beginning, I was really saying that I don't think PMs are usually the ones to blame, or at least Drake was saying that, right? Maybe now we can elaborate on why I think PMs are not the only ones to blame. And I think there is a number of reasons for that. I think in successful environments, at least in my experience, what really matters is that product people can really be the best partners to the business, right? So as a company, you hire a product person, maybe a product leader, to drive some sort of initiatives. Maybe you have some goals in mind, or maybe you don't. Maybe you have some strategy in mind, or maybe you don't. Maybe you have some metrics you want to improve, you want to monitor, or maybe not, right? And product people, in theory, are supposed to help you really elevate, step up your game to the next level. Now, clearly, that goes without saying. There is a team, there is dependencies to handle across the journey, and product people are obviously experienced in that. But imagine if, for example, in some of my examples, I was telling you how some of these dependent teams were not really delivering. Maybe they went on holidays. Maybe they were not instructed by their managers, their vertical managers, to perform the way they were supposed to. Or maybe we had other cases where, despite business or stakeholders' commitments, would it be the CEOs of the companies or some of the stakeholders backing up your initiative, wouldn't all of a sudden approve of what you were doing, maybe in the middle of your development, right? And eventually, what are you supposed to do? As a PM, you carry on, assuming you have strong data-backed, hopefully, initiatives. You really believe into your project, and you lead, not manage, you lead the team to success. However, imagine if we could remove all of these inefficiencies, right? And if those people who went on holidays, instead of going on holidays, really thought, oh, wow, I actually own a piece of this delivery. So this project is not just this guy, right, telling me what to do every single day. Otherwise, I can, sleaze and lay back on my armchair and rest, right? I can actually actively do something about it. Same story for business stakeholders. It would be so nice if more often than not, or at least more often than I experience, less changes of mind would occur. And the moment something is signed off, even if things are changing along the way, of course we can be a little agile there. I'm not saying we need to be so stiff, but assuming things are changing, we can still proceed and avoid wasting resources and try, see what happens, in case iterate, change direction later, and so forth, right? Obviously, these are not hard rules. I'm just telling you, sharing with you a little piece of my experience. Every situation is very different. In startups, you might have funding issues that you want to deal with. There might be investors that are really chasing your leadership team or yourself to really perform in a certain way. Otherwise, the cash flow is not coming in. So those are real struggles. But in general, if you could, as a product person, really empower your team to really be a team, and successes and as well as opportunities for learning and improvements are shared across the broader team, I think things would work for the better, and everybody would have, in a way, their own clear set of responsibilities and ownerships, which really could help you deliver and perform at your finest. Otherwise, it's always going to be the usual PM, wearing many hats. That's what these master classes always tell you, right? The PM wears many hats. But it's not necessarily the best way ahead, or at least there is ways to mitigate it. And as a company, you really want to do that because you really want your PMs to help you out, craft your best future without being too bothered with the day-to-day postman or manager activities. And so I think this pretty much concludes my rant. I guess I got it off my chest in a way. I hope you enjoyed. And yes, if there is anything you would like to ask me, or if you want to add me on social media, here is my LinkedIn QR code. I would be very happy to hear from the audience anything that's coming across your mind. So thank you very much. I might not be able to see you, by the way. I don't know if you guys tried to be on stage here, but there is like, you've seen Sauron, right? Like there's a little eye there.
So I like how you alluded to this idea of like the cross-team pollination of knowledge, like rather than reinventing the wheel and doing the same thing, like sharing what you've solved, I like that. I think that's one of the solutions, like you said. And then in addition to that, what do you think about this idea of sure, requirements change and all this sort of stuff, but there's a ton of engineering time, planning time, all this stuff that goes into it. If you could be crafty, right, about how you transition the requirements so you can reuse what you've already done potentially.
True.
Because a lot of times I see it as like a stop this, go to this, and then this stuff just sits there, and accumulates.
The good old context switching, right?
Yeah.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, if that's possible, that would be best. So there have been plenty of opportunities or even actual chances in the past where some pieces that we've either built or maybe bought, right? There is, especially in my startup experience, there was always a lot of interconnections between stuff that we built and stuff that we either bought or tried to integrate from third parties. Sometimes that's possible, and obviously that comes at little to no expense, hopefully. Some other times, however, things are in motion then that are really, really tough to stop or repurpose. And I think these are, the use cases I was mentioning earlier. So once you're, let's say, halfway through a development that is going to take, let's assume, 6 months, with planning, with all the buy-in from all the stakeholders, all the countries, and whatnot, that lasted maybe a year or so. What's the best course of action at that point? Say that something changes halfway through. It's hard to tell, right? Obviously, we need to look at the numbers. Every situation is different. But my take, if I can, usually is I follow through, and we see what happens. Maybe there will be some benefits that we didn't even account for, so I give it the benefit of the doubt. Or we can potentially take what we built that's maybe working in a suboptimal way and then improve upon in the next iteration, ideally.
At first, yes, I really enjoyed your talk. To the left, here, to the left,
sorry,
oh, there.
I really can't see
and
you.
I can feel your pain looking in the bright light. So I'm on the left.
Okay.
My question is, when you would have the opportunity to do one thing in a different way, what would it be?
I think some practical advice that I'm actually trying to apply to my own squads or my junior PMs that work with me is really to try and engage as many team members. And by team members, I don't necessarily mean the internal team members, like your squad's team members. It can be a broader team, right? All along the various product management phases. So it's not always possible, not always practical, but if you could include some other functions within your, let's say, typically merely product or design-oriented phases. So some discoveries, some pieces of execution, interviewing customers or stakeholders. Maybe you bring in your tech lead, you bring in your design lead, And then you keep your stakeholders constantly updated on what's going on, even on technical matters, right? I've experienced that sometimes building this level of confidence where you're really, respecting each other to the point that you're really sharing your day-to-day with the struggles you're going through and so forth. Some might not be really interested because obviously some of the stakeholders might just say, hey, look, I don't really care. I just want you to deliver what we agreed upon. But some others would just really sympathize with you and understand what's going on. And that creates, in a way, a more virtuous cycle where your internal team, let's say, is literally being dragged into every single success and hurdle of the overall journey, as well as some of your stakeholders who will be, always on par with the most recent updates on the project itself, whether there is blockers or not. And usually that works pretty well in my experience. But again, every situation is different, right? So you can definitely give it some tries. It doesn't hurt. Hope that answers the question better.